Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance Podcast, Episode 48, A Strait Betwixt Two, with guest Nathan Moon. I'm Mark Kane. The curious fellow that I am, when I learned of a Unitarian Christian who had attended Faithful Word Baptist Church in Arizona, I had to reach out. The pastor, Stephen Anderson, is somewhat infamous on the internet, so I got a hold of Nathan and discovered there was more to him than just a few stories of a pulpit-pounding pastor. Nathan is a man with deep convictions, like deep. Some of his convictions are so pronounced that it has led him to a unique place in his life. He's been betwixt. Okay, for those who haven't spent time with the King James Version, betwixt is an Old English word for between. What is also unique, Nathan is dubious of the efforts of the UCA. He had signed up originally, but later he removed his membership, the product of his convictions. It would have been fun today to unpack everything he thinks about our efforts, but I preferred to hear his actual story. Let's just say, when he's convicted about something, he makes his decision and moves on. I respect that, and I wanted him here anyway. Nathan lives in a gap, an uncomfortable space, but he recognizes it and is honest about it. This is how he got there. Nathan, I appreciate that you are willing to chat with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be on here.
I'll admit, I wanted to talk to you because I found you very interesting. You've met somebody that many people on the internet know, and I liked the way you were expressing your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm always willing to try and talk with people and give them my experiences with the hope that it'll help them out of a situation that maybe I've been through, or just talk about doctrine. We're supposed to try the Spirit, so I try and just listen and speak when I can. So,
yeah. Now, let's just fill in some background details. Tell us how you've ended up to where you are now.
My dad was in the military, Army, and so I kind of grew up everywhere. I was born in Wisconsin. We were stationed overseas in Germany. That's actually where I began school. We came back stateside and lived in Georgia. And then we came back to Wisconsin. And I've been in Wisconsin pretty much since then, with the exception of the trip that we took down to Phoenix shortly after we got married.
Okay.
We did a lot of church hopping during that time just because of how frequently we traveled. About sixth grade, we stopped going to church after my parents got divorced. But my spiritual background is primarily Baptist, the independent fundamental Baptist. It was just what we did when we visited my grandparents. I remember always having this weariness of Catholicism. And I don't know if that was just stuff that I had picked up in the preaching when I would visit, but I just knew that Catholicism was bad. It was evil. And to be honest, I thought if you were not independent fundamental Baptist, you were probably Catholic. We visited Grandpa and Grandma, and we were Baptist, and then we'd go home and I'd go to school, and that was it. I have a Bible, actually.
Yeah.
I was taking notes, evidently, during one of the sermons. My very bad child handwriting. I have these notes talking about burning in the flames forever if you're not born again and stuff. It's just what we did.
Yeah. Well, that comment that you wrote in there, that would be admissible in a court of law. Was he really in an independent fundamental Baptist church?
Right.
Yes. See Exhibit A.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in college, I had started going to a charismatic church. So I got to experience speaking in tongues and contemporary Christian music on a stage. I remember my grandparents, oh, wow, they're going back to church. Just stay away from charismatic churches. Okay. So now it's Catholic and charismatic. That's evil.
Okay.
Originally, I was pursuing an education major because I wanted to be a teacher. But upon my conversion, my desire to teach in like a public school or something had changed to study the Bible as much as I can and teach others the Bible. So then I started looking at just getting a general major in English and then advancing to a seminary to study the Bible.
Okay.
And then I start missing something in my Christian walk. I'm reading the Bible a lot and I have a lot of questions. I'm going to my teachers and a lot of my friends who were involved with Campus Crusade for Christ with me. We would do Bible studies very frequently. I just wasn't getting good, solid answers. And so I started to look for things on YouTube like hard preaching. And I stumbled upon Steven Anderson's videos because if you typed in hard preaching, Steven Anderson was like always the top result.
You know what? I don't want any of it. I don't want a boat. I don't want a guest house. I don't want an RV. I don't want to own anything. I'll take off my coat and get rid of it. I don't even want it. I don't need anything. You know what I want? I want my children to love God. That's what I want.
I just got hooked. I had a very growing concern with the ecumenicalism of the parachurch ministries like Campus Crusade for Christ, Navigators, and InterVarsity, because all of a sudden, Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, Presbyterians, Historic Baptists, Southern Baptists, Charismatic, like they're all under one roof, singing the same songs, allegedly talking about the same Jesus. And there's all this confusion in these Bible studies. And I'm thinking, there's got to be more consistency. Here's what the Bible says here. Why are they making up excuses for it? So I became very, not discouraged, angry. I was found in a place of confusion that grew into anger because I wasn't getting the questions answered. And Steven Anderson fed that anger.
I see.
So,
all right. Well, tell me if this is right. So as you became more discouraged with what you were seeing in the ecumenical, let's all get together, you were gravitating basically to what would be considered the opposite extreme. It was no, there's only one way or the highway. This is it. And we know what we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when you had mentioned you wanted to interview me about this particular topic, I was thinking a lot about how I feel in light of the experience that I'm sharing. It's definitely benefited me as much as there is a lot of confusion and hurt. But I still ultimately fall on the side that it is what it is. It's black and white. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room on like certain issues. So I still kind of fall into that line. But when I look back at my experience, I just view it as God was leading me toward the truth. And that was just a pit stop along the way. It's like when Abraham and Sarah were on their way to the promised land, but then they took that detour down to Egypt. And then they went back and then continued their journey. I think everyone needs those detours to Egypt. They don't belong there, but something puts them there, whether it be like a pestilence or a family situation, and they need to be in that place for a while before God will lead them out. I'm still that same headstrong, stubborn Nathan, but I just have the truth now. You know, I was a Trinitarian then, now I'm a biblical Unitarian, but I'm still just as stubborn.
Well, I would like to talk about your Egypt. You sat in the church with one of the internet's most aggressive pastors. I just really want to understand what that was like.
Yeah, I got there because I really wanted to be taught under this man. I thought, wow, this is a man who reads the Bible, he believes the Bible, and he's not afraid to say what it says. That's what I was looking for and wasn't getting. So that had me. I thought, if I want to be a Bible teacher and he's teaching the Bible, I want to learn from him. The way that they do it down there is if you're a man and you want to be a pastor or an evangelist or anything, he has like these preaching times throughout the week. We would have an assignment for like Bible memorization, but then each of us would get a certain amount of time up in the pulpit and we would have to give a message. We would get feedback from him and everyone else would chime in. That was our seminary because they did not believe at all in seminary. If you were going to be taught for preaching, it was going to be through the local church. It was kind of like this Paul Timothy idea. You're going to be my protege. You're going to learn from me,
Hmm.
and I'll show you how to pastor. I'll show you how to teach. That's another thing that I do agree with, that.
Okay.
It's just the doctrine that was coming from that pulpit is just, it's atrocious. The problem with it is they can teach everything and anything they want from the pulpit, but if you're in the chair listening, it's very hard for you to think differently from what's coming from the pulpit.
Hmm.
So if it's wrong and you approach the pastor or you approach someone else and you approach the wrong person, if what you are approaching them about comes off as offensive or heretical, you will be made to feel ostracized and you will be pushed out.
Okay. So there were some problems.
Yes. Anyone could look up Steven Anderson on YouTube or just type in his name on the internet, and you will find video clips of this man on nightly news saying how he wishes more homosexuals had been killed in these tragic shooting events, and calling for the federal government, local, state government to execute sodomites and pedophiles and adulterers and all these people because, well, it's what the Bible says. And if the government were godly, like what Paul implies in Romans chapter 13, then they would be using the sword to slay evildoers, just like what it says. And so part of the anger and frustration is that the government's not doing that. So it's all the more reason to hate people and call down hellfire and brimstone from the pulpit. It's just a severe, merciless hatred of their enemies.
Hmm.
And if anything, that's probably the most important reason why I had to leave, is because that is not following Jesus at all. So
Now, did you know that going in, though? I mean, you had heard him some on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was very much on board with that message because I was having troubles reconciling those passages in the Old Testament with Jesus's teachings in the New Testament. And I didn't like the answers I was being given from my evangelical friends because a lot of them were dispensationalist. Well, that was the law. That's done away with. But there was still other things that Jesus was saying that we couldn't do that either because, well, now Paul is saying this. I'm sitting here thinking, like, none of this makes sense. All of this is God's word. There has to be a way to reconcile these three things in the Bible. And I thought at the time that Steven Anderson was properly harmonizing these parts of Scripture. Because if Jesus is God, and in Psalm 11, it says that, but the wicked and him that loveth violence, his soul hateth. Well, see, David is saying that God hates people and Jesus is God. So we can kind of chop the Bible up to make love your enemies mean, well, the caveat is if they're a violent, wicked sodomite, they're a reprobate and therefore they're past God's love. So that's how they were justifying these things.
Okay.
So I can have a Jesus that says, love your enemies, but there's a caveat to that. And I find that caveat by taking Romans chapter 1 and these Leviticus passages and squashing those together.
And so you started out your preaching, you actually joined the class because you hadn't come to terms with the problems yet.
Right.
So did it happen while you were in class that you started to discover?
The reason we left was because when we left Wisconsin to go down to Phoenix, I had taken an interest in studying church history at the encouragement of a pastor whose church we were attending and his friend. And those two men said, hey, you should really study church history, particularly Baptist history. So I start reading all this Baptist literature. Now I'm in Phoenix and I have these questions for Steven Anderson, and he's kind of pushing those off, and none of that stuff really matters. We don't need history. The only thing that matters is the King James Bible. You know, you can get off into the weeds when you start reading these scholars and these commentaries. So he introduces suspicion and doubt in the things that scholars, historians, and professionals say on one hand, but he'll conveniently cherry pick what he needs to appear as though these things somehow matter. And I remember it was a Wednesday night. He said from the pulpit that he no longer believes communion was for church and church members as like an assembly, because Baptists, quote unquote, haven't always done it that way. And I'm thinking, I don't know a Baptist group that didn't have any kind of interest or emphasis on the importance of the Lord's Supper. Because I'm reading Baptist history, evidently he's not. So
Yeah.
I approached him and I said, hey, I disagree with you. I would like to do a study on this and let's compare notes. And he said, sure, let's do it. Let's give it a week. Now, this was Wednesday night. So I study, I get all my notes together regarding history, according to the sources I had. And it's that Sunday night that he does another sermon, basically entirely closing the door on anyone who would want to have that kind of conversation. I was like, what the heck? Like, we still have a few more days until we're going to study this out. But he evidently wasn't up to the challenge or didn't want to be questioned or anything. So I was like, that's really weird.
Yeah. When you say closing the door, you mean,
Yeah.
like,
He said, as long as I'm the pastor of this church, this is how we're going to do it.
oh, some of the things that I've seen on the internet, some of which are actually directed toward people who would deny the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
This church is not a free-for-all. This isn't an open mic. This isn't a karaoke bar. Okay? I'm the man of God here. I meet the qualifications. I run this church. And if you don't like it, then get out.
You know, did you get to hear, I mean, was that commonplace, that kind of aggressive, get him out of the church approach?
It wasn't every time. If the sermon found its way to mention any of our enemies, he would go off on that tangent.
Okay.
As far as a lot of the stuff that you might find on the internet, I wasn't really there for that stuff. But as far as the anti-Trinity stuff, that issue didn't arise until maybe a year or two after we left. Before that, it was mostly just your standard anti-sodomite, anti-evolution, anti-television, anti-Jehovah's Witness. Yeah, just normal stuff.
No, normal stuff. Yeah. Now, I'm interested in what was happening in your head at this point, because on the one hand, what attracted you to his approach was a determination, a resolute confidence that this was the truth.
Yes.
But then your personal experience was, wow, he wasn't even interested in discussing something as simple as a piece of Baptist history.
This is my dilemma, because I meet these people who, if it's the truth, we're going to preach it, no matter what. And I really do admire their boldness and their zeal. I love it so much. But when you say that we are in total pursuit of the truth, but you're unwilling to look at the truth or even consider maybe you might be wrong, that really bothers me. And I can say for certainty, I knew something he did not know because of my studies, and he was unwilling to acknowledge that. I'm not trying to puff myself up by saying that, but I'm just trying to say that for as much as they like to claim that they know the truth, that they know as much as they do, they really don't. When you tell your listeners, you don't need to go back to the Greek, that's James White mumbo jumbo, that's textual criticism, it's straight from the pits of hell. When that's the message, it shuts down any and all inquiry.
Yeah.
So even if you do happen to look at a Greek word and find out that, well, hey, this would be interesting for Steven Anderson to learn, you don't know how he's going to react to that.
Wow. But
we're talking, what's it called? The Hegelian dialectic or cognitive dissonance. Like, if you want a good case study on cognitive dissonance, it is the Andersonites. Because if only the Textus Receptus is the inspired Greek manuscript that underlies the King James Bible, what harm would there be in reading from the Greek Textus Receptus,
right,
to get more depth and meaning to the words? But suddenly you start looking at the Greek. Is that heresy? Am I going to hell like James White now? It doesn't make sense. And that's just one example.
So James White was damned.
Oh my, he has a documentary and he interviews James White in it. And it's very tense.
Oh.
He has several documentaries here. I would not recommend you watch any of them.
Okay. All right.
I used to own all of them, and then I threw them in the garbage.
I was tempted to say, I might actually agree with a couple things he says about James White, but I don't know if I want to put that on the record. So
I know what you mean. I agree with James White on some things and others I don't. But back then, James White is from Phoenix.
Oh.
Had I chanced upon James White in the wild, I would have approached him and I would have probably screamed at him in the aisle, calling him a reprobate and that he's going to hell. There's nothing that would have stopped me from doing that because that's how much we as a congregation hated Calvinists and these perverters of God's word. They use the ESV. That's wicked as hell.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
So it's interesting. I've come a long way. The grace of God is wonderful.
Mm. So you leave and I mean, it's like you're rebuilding again.
Yeah. My whole life has been rebuilding. I'm so used to just picking up and moving from my experience in the military. I think that's why it's so easy for me to become obsessed with something because I don't know how long I'll have it for, and then I can just let it go. And so I was completely immersed and on board one moment. And then the next, it's like that proverb that says, go from the presence of a foolish man, and thou perceivest not in him the words of knowledge. I've latched on to verses like this, and that's what's helped me accept the reality that, you know what? If what that man is saying is wrong, I don't care who he is. I don't care how devoted I was to him or that ministry. I am gone. As soon as someone starts speaking nonsense and they're unwilling to talk about it and work through it, I'm gone. There's no reason to stick around. I just dust off my feet.
Well, is it time to talk about where that's left you?
Yes, because that brings me to my biblical Unitarianism. Very briefly.
Okay.
We joined a small church in the area that we live in now. We got rebaptized and I was ordained, quote unquote, to be a teacher in the church.
Okay.
We have a historical connection to the Seventh-day Baptists. So I started to inquire into our own church's history, stumbled upon that, and then I started looking at the Sabbath issue. And then I became Sabbatarian. My studies into the Sabbath issue led me into the issue of the Trinity. And that coincided with a falling out that took place in Phoenix with some friends of ours who they started teaching something that sounded like modalism. And so they were kicked out of the church along with 5 other families. 2 or 3 others were like excommunicated. We were already safe up in Wisconsin. And I started thinking, well, it doesn't sound like what he's saying is wrong. He's still saying Jesus is God. What's wrong with that? That's not anti-Trinity. So I started looking and I was like, oh, he's teaching modalism. And that's what the Bible teaches. But I didn't have access to biblical Unitarian literature at the time. So I stopped at modalism for about 6 to 9 months. So I came into Unitarianism through an issue at a former church because I loved the people who got kicked out. And also because I was doing study on the Sabbath. So those 2 things brought me to biblical Unitarianism. And I've been there for 3-4 years now, maybe.
Okay. Well, then I'm guessing because you came to those conclusions, this group that you were part of, you're no longer with them. No,
it's very sad. There was some property disputes and stuff involving money. It was very, very discouraging. And that has also shaped my view of like church structure. So you have Stephen Anderson and his so-called pastoral care approach. And then you have this other issue at this new church involving finances and property. And that's kind of shaped me in another direction. These things all kind of coalesce where I am now.
Let's talk about where you are now, because for me, this was one of the more interesting aspects of your story.
Yes. So I am kind of in a strait betwixt two and have a major dilemma on my hands that I think I have solved sometimes, but then I enter this gloomy despair of thinking I'm the only one and I'm so lonely. And I start thinking of the better days when I was teaching to people And I had friends and everything was okay because we all believed the same. And those were easier times for sure. But I am where I am now simply because if I'm convinced that something is the truth, I don't know if it's just who I am by nature, because I am naturally stubborn and I am an anarchist from birth. I'm just a pure individual. So if I believe something, I'm not going to let it go. If I think I'm right, I'm right. If I know I'm right, I am right because I've seen it. It's been shown to me. So I have to deal with that. And also this idea of trying to get along with other people.
Yeah.
I can get along with people, but I was taught not to get along with people. So I feel like part of my isolation is me rehabilitating myself and learning exactly where I fit in with people, if I ever can fit in with people. Because if it's the truth, it's the truth. And I know for a fact, biblical Unitarianism is the truth. So there is no way that I will ever go to a Trinitarian church. I don't care how desperate for fellowship I am. Another thing is I will never go to a Sunday keeping church, ever. I don't care if they are the strictest biblical Unitarians on this planet, because I am so convinced that we should keep the Sabbath. And if I feel like I'm breaking that commandment, I'm not gonna do that. That's two issues.
Yeah.
There are so many more that so many people would think, why would you make such a big deal about that? But I really am obsessed with, if I don't see it in the New Testament, I am not going to do it at all. So that's where I am now.
When we talked about that earlier, I remember hearing you said some of those things.
I would say it's probably in my article, What Becoming a Biblical Unitarian Taught Me is part of it, but there's another Why I'm Leaving Christianity post. Some people would look at that and say, you're not willing to compromise on that, really? And I'm thinking, yeah, really.
Yeah.
I'm just weird. I'm sorry, people. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, some people might be weird and just be mean about it, and in a way that makes it hard to converse about it. But I have no trouble talking to you about this. And as you describe, I couldn't go to this church, I couldn't do this. I'm going back through my mind of multiple people that I have interacted with over the years who say those kinds of things, but I just don't understand them. You know, I don't think the way that you just described. Maybe you could tell, the podcast, but I don't. But yet I'm interacting with people who say things that sound just like that, and I don't understand it. So you are giving me this opportunity to kind of unpack, what is that? How is it that you are thinking? And it's fascinating to me.
I feel like a lot of people, and this isn't for everyone, so I'm not trying to paint with too broad of a brush.
Okay.
But I feel like some people who might communicate some of the things that I do, they're coming from a place of pure anger because I don't know why. Maybe they were hurt more than what I was because, like I said, I take the initiative to just leave before anything bad could possibly happen. My intent is always to leave on a good note, no matter what the issue is over. I didn't approach Steven Anderson at any moment and say, you're wrong, I'm out of here. I just stopped going.
Interesting.
And they pled with me not to leave. But I said, you know what? I just disagree and we're going to go.
So your approach then is very stubborn, but non-aggressive. Is that close?
Yes, because I'm terrified. As loud as I speak sometimes and as frantically as I may be typing on my keyboard and as stubborn as I am, I hate conflict. I hate conflict because who wants to be accused of being the one who is a wolf or a rabble rouser? And I've heard that, even though I've tried to keep a hushed tone, even though I've tried to acquiesce, I've still always, you're a heretic or you're a novice or you just love. I had someone say once, you just love the controversy and the attention. And I thought to myself, but your pastor is the one who seems to enjoy going on nightly news and saying all these things. I don't want any Karens at my house. My agenda's not that wide. I just want to get to the truth so that I know how to better worship my God.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't make sense, I'm abandoning it. It's as simple as this. There are certain things in the Bible that they're just simple truths. God is not the author of confusion. So if someone cannot come to me and break it down and simplify it so that I can understand it, it's ungodly. I want nothing to do with it. If it takes them 5 paragraphs to talk about something when it should only take them 2, I want nothing to do with it. You have my 11th grade English teacher to thank for that, because I wrote this story and apparently I was too much like Stephen King, and she wrote, "Brevity is the soul of wit," and made me rewrite it with less adjectives and adverbs. I learned to just be simple. God said to Habakkuk, "Make it plain, so that he that readeth may run with it." So if you're going to be a prophet or a teacher, you have to be able to take God's word and distill it down to its absolute most essential principles and points so that people can understand you, so that they know what action to take. And when you can't do that, I'm gone. And it's not to say I'm the best at doing it or I can do it, but there's too much information out there to have to sift through to get to the truth when it's right there. I think in Amos it says, "Can 2 walk together except they be agreed?" Answer, no. So stop doing it. It's as simple as that to me. And I look around in frustration at the willingness to kind of cheat that. And I see that in Unitarianism. If you want to go there, I think that Unitarianism will fail as a movement because we have people who call themselves Unitarians. There are a number of them who are willing to ignore the issue of Trinitarianism being idolatry. Did Jesus sit with sinners? Yes, because he loved them. But his message was still exclusive. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Jesus says things like, "They that do the will of my Father in heaven, they are my mother, they are my brother, they are my sister." So if someone's not doing that will, why do we call those people brethren? I've always had this confusion over why Paul would say, don't eat with someone who's called a railer or an extortioner or an idolater or a drunkard or an adulterer, etc. Kick them out. Hand them over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Yet, we're either telling people to go to Trinitarian churches because they just need fellowship, or we're welcoming Trinitarians as brethren and not as people that need to hear the truth and be converted. I don't understand how to reconcile those things.
Yeah.
It's difficult, and I feel like it's dangerous.
Yeah. Now,
and I could be wrong, but I don't know.
well, but you've gone through the process. You've shifted from one thing to the next. So you know what that's like to realize I might be wrong about this. I would attest that one of the reasons that I found it so easy to have this conversation with you is that you had gone through that process enough times to know to back off. But maybe it's also your personality that you're just not mean.
Oh, wow.
But
I appreciate that. Most people read the things that I write and they're like, man, do you have to be so condescending? Do you have to be so patronizing? And I just try and make it as clear and simple as possible. I can't do anything other than that. I'm not responsible for how a person reacts to the things I write.
I will put links to your website, so if somebody wants to read that. You know, the church is made up of all varieties of people. There will be people who are just sweet. You know, hospitality is their one sole gift. And that's what they do. And they haven't had a theological argument since the day they were born. But then there are other people who feel certain things strongly. And it's those people who poke the bear and be like, I think this needs to be said.
Right.
And I see that as like, oh, what an opportunity to think through something that I might not have thought through before. So I guess for me, I have a very hard time being offended. I read your articles and thought, oh, these are some really good questions. I'm going to enjoy interacting with you about these topics. I know maybe that is just me. Maybe I have my own particular characteristics like you do, but
Right. Yes. I'm just an OCD perfectionist kind of person. Where I'm at now, I'm outside. I call this place the wilderness, and I feel like the church needs people. I'm using it that way for the sake of the listeners. The church, so to speak, needs people on the outside who have been in the inside. I feel like I don't belong for a reason, and I don't know what that reason is, but I feel like my place is to take as much of a high view of everything as I can to say, well, wait a minute. What about this? Wait a minute. What about that? Because otherwise, when you're in these communities for so long, we see this all the time in Trinitarianism, you grow up in this way of thinking that, well, everyone's just a Trinitarian. You take everything for granted. You don't realize that there's other voices out there. And when you're in that kind of environment as a Unitarian, you become blind to the issues that need reforming.
Yeah.
The Protestants failed because they were only willing to go so far. And that's why if I were to call myself anything, I would call myself an Anabaptist, because the Anabaptists were those Protestants who went further. And they said, well, it's not just indulgences. It's also church hierarchy, church structure, it's baptism. It's let's put everything on the table. And so it's basically just this radical desire to just shake people awake and just lay that axe to the root.
Yeah.
I need to get to the root of everything I can and test all things. I feel like being in a, quote, church stifles that.
Any time you have a group, I mean, this is just group dynamics. And in the recent podcast that we've had, we've seen some examples of how that goes very awry, like in Lorraine's story about the JWs,
right,
where it becomes about the organization itself. You know, you need to preserve the organization.
Mm-hmm.
It is remarkably hard in a church that has been established to raise the flag of, hold on, something is wrong here. You know, they're your buddies and they're your friends. How many people had to leave Trinitarian churches crushed because they no longer had their friends? That keeps some people there.
Yeah.
Well, I can't leave.
Trust me, I know what it's like to be stuck between, well, should I leave or should I go? I spent a lot of money going down to Phoenix. It was very difficult to make that move and then to turn around a year later and move right back because of a mistake in what I believe. That's like anyone going on a church's doctrinal statement saying, we found it, honey. We found a Unitarian church. Let's go. They get there. They find out, oh, but they also believe this. They didn't think to maybe ask those questions because they're just so desperate to get there. And then they find themselves trapped.
Yeah.
Now it's hard to leave because you have these obligations. You have these friends. It's hard. So I know exactly what it's like.
Yeah.
I guess all I'm saying is, as Unitarians, we have to come to a place where we begin to draw the lines. What is the standard? And I'm not saying the UCA needs to do this. I'm saying you as an individual. If Unitarianism is a matter of salvation for you, which I think it should be a matter of salvation, then you need to know that that's your line. If it's the state of the dead, that needs to be a line. You need to know yourself, and you have to be willing to do that. And I understand that it's not easy.
Now, I appreciate that. And there are folks who are going to completely resonate and understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be others who disagree with you. You know, I see things maybe this is a fault of mine, and I will admit I could be wrong, but I see things in a lot of various shades. I tend to picture things on gradient scales and think about, like, well, where are we right now here in this conversation on this scale? And where might we be on that scale? You know, there are people in Trinitarian churches where the church doesn't talk about the Trinity much, and who, if you actually ask them what they believed, they would sound like you and me.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Because is that wrong to be worshiping God with a perspective in your mind that is correct? You know, there is that fuzzy ground, and what do we do with it?
I think that fuzzy ground, and this is what I've been learning, is just what Jesus says. My sheep hear my voice. and I know them, and they follow me, and I give unto them eternal life. As many as the Father has given Jesus come to Jesus, and it's not me, then I get to wait on the Father and see what he does. And then when I find someone who says, I never thought of it that way before. When are your Bible studies? Then I get to rejoice and say, this might be a sheep. This might be someone who has ears to hear and eyes to see, and who the Father's drawing. But when you get those angry and upset reactions, just step back and say, you know what? I did what I could. Here are the links. Here's the book. That might be a sheep who was in a place I was 5 years ago, hating people like me.
It's interesting hearing your description of how you interact with people, because it is so non-Andersonite. And yet, deep inside, the rigidity and seriousness of truth is as present as anything.
I guess I look at it, truth has to be at its very core something that is rigid. 3 + 3 is 6, 1 + 1 is 2. You cannot change that at all. And if we're talking about matters of people's soul, their eternal destiny, why try and bend and twist it any other way just to accommodate someone's feelings? You can love someone, and this took me a very long time to understand, and I'm still learning this. You can still love someone and rebuke them sharply. You ask an Andersonite, did Jesus hate the Pharisees? They'll say yes. And they justify that by saying, he called them blind guides, hypocrites, whited sepulchres. He was trashing on them. He was really giving it to them. Yeah, he was, but from a place of absolute love and compassion. That's the Jesus I see when he's sternly rebuking these men, and he has to turn to his own people and say, Abraham's not your father. The devil is your father, right? Like he's calling them Satanists.
Yeah.
From a place of love. So he was completely unwilling to compromise his message and still find a way to rebuke people and love them. That's something that I struggle with, because I was taught to just hate 100% of the time, like just give so much attention to everything that you disagreed with so that you could find a reason to argue with people just so you could call them a reprobate. That's almost like what your interactions with people were. Finding a reason to disagree with them so that you could give them the truth, rather than finding a reason to love that person with the hopes of giving them the truth. Really, that's the grace and mercy of God. As domineering and tyrannical as Steven Anderson can be, what I learned from that is to not be like that. It was like literally when I left Phoenix, I remember thinking to myself, sky's the limit.
Wow.
He wouldn't listen to me about this, but that's not going to stop me from investigating and seeing and testing all things and trying and doing what he wouldn't let me do, which was just ask questions and have a different opinion.
Yeah.
So I really greatly appreciate that.
Shall we put together a thank you card? I'll send it to you. You can sign it. I'll send it down. Give him what episode he can go listen to.
Right, yeah.
So he can understand, the positive impact he's having on the world by demonstrating how not to be.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate because you have people, they encounter him and they're unbelievers already, and he gives them just another reason to never want anything to do with church and Christians.
Oh.
When I was in that crowd, I was a total enemy of my brother because he has not conservative views. He was a prime candidate for one of Steven Anderson's stones. I hated him. I hated my dad. I hated my brother. I hated my brother's friends just because of their lifestyle. And my relationship with a lot of my family was severely strained. So coming out of that, I was able to restore a lot of those relationships. I just read what Jesus said, and I've learned to let people believe what they're going to believe. They can be wrong all they want. My responsibility is to first love these people and not judge them because I could be where they are, or I have been where they are. And I'm still learning to find a way to not dilute the truth and still bring it to them. So many times I have that moment where I go and I rebuke Jezebel. And then I'm looking for God in the whirlwind, or I'm looking for God everywhere else other than where he is. And I need to always remind myself that that still small voice is saying, you're not the only one. This is not your burden. I am sovereign. It's been such an incredible journey. I would do it all over again. Anderson and all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nathan, your candidness, your honesty about your experiences, even, the parts that were difficult. I can tell it's not been easy. And I am thankful to hear that your relationship with your family has been rebuilt. That's amazing. And now you have opportunities to spend time with them. And I mean, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know there are more people like you out there, and they are churning on this same kind of point in their life. Like, well, I feel real strongly about this, but I don't think I want to look like Steven Anderson in a YouTube video someday.
Yeah.
I hope that your description of how you came through that, how you perceive it, and what you do will be a blessing to them, because it's been a blessing to me.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
As much as I would love to have people assembling with me, whether it's in my house or their house or wherever, I truly do think that there's value in that community. But I feel like right now, I just need to be in that mountain. I need to be in the wilderness. And I want people to know that it's okay. You don't have to compromise the truth in order to have something else. You don't have to compromise something else in order to have the truth. It's okay to be in different places in your life.
Yeah.
My situation, we weren't in any physical or psychological harm personally. We were on the gracious end of the stick. Other people have had way worse experiences at Faithful Word Baptist Church than we have. And there are other places where there are far worse things going on behind the scenes. So I hope that if anyone is in a place that's like what I'm describing and you need help getting out, you need to find people that you trust and can talk to. You're not alone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I send out an email each time I release an episode. It's an email newsletter. It's my way of giving a bit extra to those regular listeners who may enjoy more details about an episode, or extra hints about what's coming up, or whatever I decide to share in the email. I usually write it the very next thing after the episode is completed. So you are getting my fresh, maybe raw, thoughts on that episode. If you're interested in joining the Inner Circle, there's a link in the show notes or a sign-up on the podcast page, podcast.unitarianchristianalliance.org. Oh, I also include a larger image of the cover art. My wife, Karen, she does the lettering, and Hannah Deane's episode was a visual treasure of extra swirly letters. And you people who got the email, you know what I'm talking about. Events. April has both a men's and a women's event in New York. And I'm excited to share that April also has one of the two brand new events created specifically for UCA folks. That one in April is our first West Coast event in Idaho. The events we've previously been adding have been existing events that are types at which UCA people would be welcome. These new events, however, have been created by smaller groups, like 1 or 2 people. These are quite a joy to see. I hope for many of these to crop up all over the planet. May has the other new small-scale, but not small-hearted event in Kentucky. And if you've always wanted to check out that Noah's Ark place, this is your chance. June has 3 events: Kentucky, Indiana, and New York. July has a women's event in Illinois, September an event in New York, and to see the details for all of these, go to unitarianchristianalliance.org/events.
Hello, Mark. This is Tim. I appreciated the last podcast, the interview with the young woman, Hannah. Even more so, I appreciated the link to Stephen Snobelen's address at the conference about Paul Best. I was a history major in college. History's always been important to me, and it's just so helpful to get the background, the long history of the Unitarian view of God. Pray for me, as it's all kind of new still, and not very many people really know what I've been thinking over the past year. I haven't found anyone locally who really is believing like I do at this point. So thank you. I appreciate what you're doing. I look forward to your podcast each week.
Tim, it is great to hear from you, and I'm glad you enjoyed the history of Paul Best. What some of our predecessors endured is absolutely astounding and humbling. Thank you to Stephen Snobelen, too, for doing the arduous research into these individuals and gathering it together for us. I love to hear from you. Write me, podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org, or send me an audio clip like Tim did. There's a link in the show notes. This is going to seem completely out of the blue, but I am convicted to share it. I'm involved in cyber security stuff through work. It has gotten bad out there. There are criminals working around the clock trying to fool unsuspecting people into handing over their savings. It's terrible. If someone reaches out to you to help you with your computer or your bank account, and you didn't initiate it, you didn't call them first and ask for them to help you, do not do it. They intend to help themselves, not you. Be as suspicious of them as you are of the popular Trinitarian apologists who resort to ad hominem attacks, or who praise the Chalcedonian Creed as a guide to the proper way to think. I'm not joking. These criminals can wipe your savings out. And all along, you'll think you're doing the right thing. They are manipulative. If you get nothing else out of all these podcasts, get this. There are people in every corner of society who prey on and control others. Politicians, business leaders, criminals, hackers, spouses, friends, teachers, etc., and of course, religious leaders.
I run this church, and if you don't like it, then get out.
It's a shame you have to live like this, always looking over your shoulder. But you do. Please, do not do anything with your life savings because of a phone call or email. If you have a friend who is working through convictions on truth, similar to Nathan, maybe suggest this episode. It could really encourage them to know they aren't the only ones betwixting it out there. Or perhaps Nathan brought up many good points that you would love to talk about with your new UCA friend, the one you have coffee with once a month. Tell them to listen to it in preparation for your next coffee. Nathan, as I noted, I appreciate your writing style. Direct, sharp, and thoughtful. Do I agree with everything? No. Will that stop me? No. Will you appreciate any thoughts that I have about your work? Absolutely. I have no doubt. It's anabaptistapologist.com, if you're curious. And Nathan, watch for another phone call someday soon, because I want to hear more of your thoughts on our UCA efforts. You haven't heard the last of me. Keep poking the bear. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.